Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mysteries of life. Today's episode is sponsored by Therese Couture, women's leadership coach and spiritual teacher, founder of Black Girls Breathe, and creator of the Circle of Reclamation course. You might remember Therese from episode 85 of the Numinous Podcast, where she told us a riveting story about the time she and her husband were racially profiled, and also talked about her strong connection to her family's Haitian lineage and her inheritance of intergenerational wisdom from a long line of healers. I'm happy to share more about her newest free program, Embodied Manifestation, later on in the show. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and today I'm all geeked up and excited about this conversation I had with Laura Tempest Zakroff, author of Sigil Witchery, A Witch's Guide to Crafting Magick Symbols. Laura has actually written several books about witchcraft, including Weave the Liminal, Living Modern Traditional Witchcraft, and The New Aradia, A Witch's Handbook to Magical Resistance. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Rhode Island School of Design and frequently speaks and performs at pagan conferences and witches' gatherings. And she leads sigil craft workshops, and that's the one I want to attend in person someday, because I loved this book, Sigil Witchery. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Laura about the magic of making your own sigils. Welcome, Laura. What identities do you lead with?
I consider myself an artist, an author, a dancer, just a general human being. I don't like to get caught up too much in labels because I find that's always something that's shifting and changing and often feeds into other people's idea of what I am versus how I see myself.
Mm-hmm. I've really enjoyed your book, Sigil Witchery, A Witch's Guide to Crafting Magick Symbols, and I'm so excited to talk to you about it today because I have so many little Post-it darts in my copy here. So tell us, what is sigil magic and what can you use it for?
Sigil is any symbol that has been drawn, carved, painted, etched, that is believed to have magical properties. So any symbol that believes to have magical properties. So combining those things together gives you, especially with sigil witchery, is the application of witchcraft, spellcraft, and sigils. So bringing those two things together.
So where would people perhaps see sigils that they might not have recognized as sigils? I'm just curious if they're around us all the time, or if there's something that is kind of the purview of arcane knowledge and secret societies and that sort of thing.
Once you start getting into sigils, you do start seeing them everywhere. It's like, oh, look at that. What's that about? When you think about logos, right? Brands, those are part of identity. Those are concepts that a company or business is trying to get across. So you can see even the golden arches, right, as a type of sigil. Then you look at money. Money often has different symbols, especially the American dollar bill, the pyramid and such. And just kind of all around us using initials, having the little emblems that may be embroidered on the towels, a sense of ownership is another way of looking at that. So they really are all around us.
Mm. An interesting difference and I guess modernization really of your approach is sort of found between the difference between chaos magic and the way that you're doing it. So could you just explain how chaos magic handles sigils and how you have given that a twist or a different approach?
Sure. So the kind of quick and dirty look at chaos magic, how the most common sigil methods have evolved, comes from Austin Osman Spare. And he created many sigil methods, but one of the ones that became most popular for chaos magic is to craft a statement and then eliminate letters and rearrange the letters, and then from there in some way activate it through burning, through other methods.
Kind of staring at it for a while.
Staring at it. Other ways of forming trance. Some of them involve like sexual acts. It's like there's a whole range that people keep adding onto it. So that's just one way, though he definitely created art kind of a little more similar to what I do. And so for my method is an intuitive approach that uses the lines, the marks, the symbols that are important to you. And instead of making a clarified statement, you start off like you would with any spell, which is figure out what is it that you want to accomplish. And instead of just jumping to the next thing, which would be like, oh, I want money, I'll light a green candle. Like, okay, what does that mean to bring prosperity, or what kind of money do I need? Am I going into a new job? You brainstorm. So that's step 2, is to look at the parts that make this up. And this is crucial because magic follows a path of least resistance. So if you just make a general statement, you're not really thinking deeply about how are you visualizing the end result, what are the means that are necessary to make that happen. And then step 3 is designing it, which is taking those words, those brainstorming ideas, and finding the symbols that work with them, even if they're just simple marks, lines, dots, and assembling them. And then technically at the end of stage 3, you're done. That moment when you look at it and go, oh, that looks good. That's when your brain says, it has begun. But because we're human beings and we like ritual and we like pattern, there's step 4, which is to apply and or acknowledge, which brings in the kind of more spellcraft witchery aspect, which is, say you're doing a sigil for cleansing to get rid of some emotional issue that you've been dealing with, then you might draw it onto your bar of soap. And every day, you're washing with that concept and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to let this go. And so there's this very physical process. So you don't have to burn it. You don't have to erase it. You don't have to stare at it. You definitely don't have to masturbate to it. And because it already has started in your brain, because all magic starts with thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exciting. And I love the soap one. And I'm thinking about, so my husband and I have a neighbor that I'm just going to say it, I consider quite loathsome. He's just like an archetypal misogynist. And it's such a terrible feeling. And my husband really has a hard time letting it go when he's treated with this sort of contempt. And do you think it would still work if I put the sigil on the soap and my husband didn't know it was there, but I just helped him cleanse?
Well, what's the chance of him using the soap in the bathroom too?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. This will be the shower soap. It's like, what if I put a secret, like something that would soothe his heart?
I think that would work, because when you think about honey spells, like honey jar spells, the idea that you might be sweetening someone else's disposition, it more affects you, and then the energy that you're putting out can also affect your husband, and then you're also both dealing with it. You're both conscious of the issue, so it's many different layers there. So it can't hurt.
Yeah, I like the idea of framing it as it's a honey spell. So your approach really emphasizes somatic attunement, and you have, fairly extensive exercises about dropping into the body and being in the body when you're doing your sigil magic. Why is that so important to you and in your approach?
I find that for me, for witchcraft and for works of magic, it is a mind, body, spirit experience. And so many people are just so gung-ho to run off into trance and be outside of their heads and not really consciously be present. And that tied to the physical, like we are human beings, right? We're spiritual beings having a human experience. That's one of my favorite little ways of summing that up. So when you're in your body and you're connecting them, you can have a much more profound experience. You can make things move faster. And I'm also a dancer, and to viscerally feel and see how dancing with somebody and connecting with the music can help them release energy, to connect with other people. So many things can be done that even with just drawing and still moving the body, to sit there and to draw and to find that there's another trance state that you can achieve that doesn't require any outside substances.
Would you be willing to share a little bit about your own experiences with sensation when you're drawing and you're crafting a sigil? What is the signal from your body that's the yes, like, yeah, it's complete, or yes, it has begun? What's it like for you?
It's kind of hard to put into words, because I've been doing this now for almost 40 years. And so there's a sense of when you're working on a painting or a drawing, there is a struggle. Is it done? Is it not done? But with the sigil, it's so much simpler. Mm-hmm. Most often it's simpler. Really, if it's something you're going to use over and over again, you want to keep it as simple as possible. And so when you're starting to just look at it and you're creating the shapes, there's a sense of being satisfied, almost like when you just ate a good piece of cake. You didn't eat too much, just right, and you go, oh, I feel good. All of the senses are tingling in the right way, and this just feels like a sense of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. There's like a Goldilocks moment where you realize,
right,
I've gone a little too far. Oh no, come back. It's just right. Okay. And now a word for our sponsor. When Therese Couture first approached me to sponsor a podcast episode, my immediate reply was yes, because I know her to be an experienced breathwork facilitator, a talented coach, a natural intuitive, and a fearless and compassionate shadow work guide. When she told me the name of her program, Embodied Manifestation, my thought was, maybe? I'll have to hear more first. Because for me, the word manifestation has been sort of tainted by what I'd consider to be really voracious acquisition and harmful exploitation of the planet and spiritual materialism. I really don't want to endorse something that capitalizes on people's feelings of not enoughness, or that doesn't contextualize people's privilege or lack of privilege and access within the systemic circumstances of capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism and et cetera, et cetera. But after talking with Therese about the curriculum, I was reassured that she is addressing materialism. She is acknowledging systemic forces. She is recognizing the victim blaming that has tainted the practice of manifestation magic. What she described to me about the Embodied Manifestation program reminded me of Adrienne Marie Brown's work with Emergent Strategy in terms of tapping into our creative power to imagine together and weave a new world that's concerned with the well-being for all of us. Embodied manifestation is about rooting back into your soul, redevoting yourself to creativity, and activating ritual and practice that honor your intention to manifest goodness and grace for yourself, your people, and our planet. The first free Embodied Manifestation workshop is happening Thursday, November 14th, with more throughout the end of 2019 and early 2020. Register and download your workbook at embodiedmanifestation.com/numinous. And now back to our interview. Okay, so going through your book, that you give some history, there's work on coming into the body, but you also really encourage folks to kind of get into the, I'm going to call it almost like the biomechanics or the neurobiology of it. And you talk about how important it is to craft your sigil by hand. And, I think maybe some of this could be a bit intimidating for folks like myself who would say, I'm not artistic. I can't draw. I'm not very good at that. Could you talk to that a little bit? And what is actually happening neurophysiologically, or what is happening with the mind-body-spirit connection when you just try to do your sigil by hand?
Oh, yes. It's an exciting thing. There's a few different layers to that. So within the body itself, right? So when you have a connection between your hand, your eye, and your mind, and particularly the process, and they've done studies about students taking notes, right? Students who just type their notes, they're really just missing this essential processing point because you can type faster than you can write. And when you are writing, because you're going slower, you're listening and you're going, how do I break this down so I can make it smaller? And that little extra detour through your brain helps you remember. And it's almost like a recording device. I often tell people, think back, if you come and look at your notes a month from now, you're going to remember what the room was like, who was sitting next to you, maybe if there was a type of incense in the room. We can record all of that, just like a record needle, taking in all that information. So that is an incredible metaphysical experience. The other thing about drawing, we all draw. We all did it. Kindergarten, making messy paints and, finger things. And probably most people did draw all the way up until second, third grade. Mm-hmm. And that was when society starts doing this little, well, what are you going to be when you grow up? And, well, you're just a bad drawer. Your bunny looks stupid. You shouldn't draw bunnies. And especially for children, that's traumatic to tell, people, oh, you're doing it wrong, and so many people stop drawing, or they stop thinking that they're artistic. They stop thinking creatively because they go, oh, that's not for me. I can't do that. Where all people can draw. If you can sign your, even on a tablet, if you can put your finger on there and make a squiggle on the tablet, you can use your hands to draw. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be like Picasso. That's not really a great example. You don't have to be an incredible visual artist in order to make a sigil that's effective. If you can write your name, you can make a sigil. Mm-hmm. And it's just practice. Everything that we do is practice, right? Even people are like, oh, I read the tarot, I read runes. Well, you didn't just pick them up and instantly know. Some people are like, oh, I did. And you're like, no, you still learned the deck. You still did research into what the symbols mean and ask questions about that. So there's still a process. So just like with drawing, the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you actually give quite a few, you give a whole alphabet, actually. You could almost say it's like a pictographic alphabet of like, here's some ideas for ways you can express simple concepts to more complex words. But then you also have prompts where you're encouraging people to just practice. And some of these words are kind of, I'm going to say, they're not very concrete. So for instance, the first one that you say, practice with this word is acquire. And I'm like, what? I was feeling so good about this book. And I'm curious, what, just brainstorming, acquire, what kind of shape would that look like?
So what does it mean to acquire something? It means to take on or to build, to accumulate. Mm-hmm. So a few different images that come to mind immediately would be like one of the greater than or less than signs, the chevron. Uh-huh. It's like a little mouth, a little alligator, right? It is consuming, it is acquiring, it's gathering. It could be a pyramid, which could be a little pile of things building up, or it could be a little group of dots accumulating to acquire that. It could also be a bowl.
Yeah, I was just going to say, now that you're saying it, I have this sort of bowl that's like got an opening, where it's like embracing, like, it's like, oh, this is me kind of acquiring. Things are coming in through this little hole. Okay, so you've got a ton of those, and I found them really fun and frustrating because I was like, the perfectionist in me is like, is this right? So can we just practice with one? Because you do give a lot of examples of like, okay, so here's some intention and you're really dropping in, and then you want to make sure that you've got a good energetic feel around it. And so my phrase, or my quote unquote goal, it's not really a goal, but it's, I would say like, almost like a pathfinding phrase, is loyal to the land. And if I'm really sitting into what's my intention behind that, I'd say I want it to remind me where my priorities are. So I have all these words, the kind of first part of the process seems to be write down all your associations. So part of that would be, I want to be loyal to the land that I live on as a white settler, fifth generation, but I'm also of Scottish descent. I live in Canada, but I also feel loyal to where my ancient indigenous ancestors came from. So now I'm getting kind of like out there, and I'm like, what? How am I going to draw ancestors? I guess I could do a skull, but it becomes kind of pantomime at some point. Like, could you just kind of walk us through, how would you help somebody kind of hold their hand with like, an abstract phrase like that?
Okay, so so for loyal to land is connection to land. So what is connection?
Okay.
And so immediately I think of either X marks the spot or a plus symbol, right? Or you can look at simply as, well, actually a plus symbol is really good because you would have the horizontal line for the land.
Yeah.
And then the vertical line can represent the self. And
right.
It's rooted into the land, right? So there's this cross section that happens there. Loyalty, for some people that's a star. It could be a heart. It's like, how do you see loyalty? Is that thriving? So if it's thriving, does that mean an arrow that's moving upward? Does it mean communication? An X comes back to that because technically an X is the two chevrons coming together. So it's about communication and give and take. Ancestors, if you look at a piece of paper as either going up or down or left to right on it. So like when I do dance, I consider the space behind me is this place of the ancestors. So if I'm building a sigil, I might think of the bottom. Okay, the bottom part of my sigil is a dot, that orientation place. So I begin, and then the arrow or the line or whatever I'm doing was going to come up from that. So that's that connection down. So if we did the plus, the plus might have an arrow that extends up, and it might have coming down into a dot, and on either side it might have the chevrons for communication. And then you might put a star over all of it to have the oil, and there you have your sigil.
So this is what I love about the book, because you do that, you slow down the process and you distill, you help people simplify and distill and come down to the place where like, now my body is like, yes, you said like the dot, and it's like, oh, I can feel that. I can feel the punctuation in my body of something comes alive and something is going ding, ding, ding. And so it's such a refreshing feeling as somebody who feels not terribly visually artistic. So what do you say to people who really struggle with perfectionism or really struggle with maybe some low self-esteem around, how their own artistic expression? What are the ways that you try to encourage folks to just try?
I take away their pencils. Especially if you have erasers. I have people like, well, but no, I don't have an eraser. The idea that you can erase, right? I say, get yourself a nice well-crafted pen, a nice big pen that you picked up from the bank or, the pharmacy or whatever, and your piece of paper, and you start working out those concepts and you draw. And you're going to go at some point, especially, the first time coming out, you might go, this sucks, but you're doing it in pen. So then you're going to have to pick it up and try it again. And you start to see the progression. Maybe you're like, oh, the X isn't correct. It needs to be a plus, or that line needs to go this way. And so you start to get into the trance-like state of drawing. You're connecting mind, body, and spirit. All these things come together in the visualizing. So it's practice, but it's also not giving yourself the easy out. So many people, especially if you're a perfectionist, you have to get messy. You have to make mistakes. And perfection is more about prohibiting progress than it is about achieving anything. So you have to go, all right, I'm gonna figure this out. And if the only person who's gonna know if it's not working, well, it's me, and it's up to me to figure out what's gonna work. So then it comes into claiming your own power, which is not one exercise thing. That's a lifelong thing, especially in modern society, which is magic. It doesn't exist, and you have no power, and you should just follow the rules. So there's a lot of unprogramming that has to happen. But I find when you give yourself the room to make the mistakes, to see that you're not having bad ideas, you're just exploring. Design is problem solving. So if you allow yourself the space to solve problems, you become more confident and you claim your power.
Oh, I gotta tell you, Laura, that prohibiting progress, and like I feel, like, ow, that's an arrow that lands kind of deep. It's like, oh, stop talking about me. No, that's that's excellent, simple advice. And like, what a magical, you just kind of cast a spell right there with, use pen, because it's not like you can undo anything really. You can't really erase. And so why not just track progress over time? That's fantastic advice. Now, some of the sigils that you've created have become, I think it's fair to say, viral on social media. You had the way actually that I discovered your work was through a sigil to protect protesters and those affected by ICE. What happened? How did that come into being? How did that sigil be, channeled through you?
So I teach workshops on this. I travel all over. And since about 2015, 2016, mostly I was doing the workshops at conventions and festivals. Basic pagan event or, witchy event. And like, okay, we're going to create a sigil for the event so that everyone stays healthy and have consent and, all the things. They retain the knowledge, whatever it is, it's very themed to the event. But once you get out of the festival environment, you're dealing with smaller groups of people who are coming to a class at a metaphysical shop, a cult shop, who all are coming from different backgrounds. It's not like they're coming for a festival, right? So it's an interesting mix of people. And in June of, I guess it was last year, time is flying, I had a particular West Coast tour. And on this, things just started shifting from, let's think about these, bigger happy concepts as we went at the end of November 2016 into a different state of mind. And as the tour progressed, we started in Billings, Montana, where we created a site-specific one to protect Billings against weather issues and fire. I didn't release that one because that's for Billings and that's for those folks to deal with. But as we got down through the rest of the tour, we were getting very social justice, socially minded focus where people are like, well, this is what's going on in the news. What can we do about it? And so the sigil to protect protesters and to defend against ICE happened in Portland, Oregon. And that was where the first ICE protest happened. And actually, we did this at the Ravens Wing, which is a quarter mile from where those protests were happening. So it was very much within the spirit of the place. And, between that one and the burnout sigil and the community strength sigil and the housing crisis, all of those things, I'm like, these are too big to just let them be, and so I felt like, okay, we created as a group effort, which is a wonderful thing for shared magic, that you have anywhere from 8 to 50 people coming together to craft a sigil, and then being able to put those concepts out there, explaining why it is instead of going, this is a sigil to do this. It's very important that people read what the sigil's about and what goes into it so that they understand it and can identify with it. So that's how it happened. It's just the shift in the zeitgeist of, what was going on in the culture and society, and these site-specific places that people are going, how do we solve these problems?
That's, of course. I mean, I know that you're doing these at workshops and gatherings, but it's so beautiful to pause and just reflect like, oh, right, that was collective magic that was crafted by a group. About how many people were involved in that particular workshop?
See, the Portland one, I think that was maybe 8 or 10. It's kind of a small space. So
but how beautiful. I feel like a lot of gratitude for them and for you putting this out into the world. Such a needed thing, and how special it seems like something brought you all together at that moment for that purpose. That's really touching to know that. What about the sigil for fires in the Amazon? I've actually seen that one mostly written in Portuguese, and so I don't actually know what it means. Tell me about that one.
So that sigil was particularly created for the folks who are running the We Are Radia kind of group, for lack of a better word, the chapter that's happening down in Brazil. So they contacted me. This is long before the fires. They were facing a lot of political and social unrest. And they said, we've been translating your sigils and sharing them because they're definitely applicable to what's going on here. Can you create a sigil for us? And I said, all right, well, why don't you all get together? If we can't really hard to do this long distance, but you give me that list and you tell me why these things are important to you. And I will, in that same spirit, connect and put it together. And then once, the crisis happened with the fires, they said, okay, now this is a new way to use this sigil. And so they put the ritual and the spell work together with that and released it. So it was kind of a sort of oh, look, it's come back out into the world. Because they can have different meanings like that. You think about sigils can grow and change. So they start off with like, okay, well, this is about protecting community and and our natural resources. Well, then it's also very applicable to what was going on then.
Mm-hmm. What a profound way to use sigil magic for healing and processing of various kinds of trauma and injustices and that just sounds like it really adds another layer of depth, moving away from kind of insta witch to now this can really be a profound ritual of healing.
Yeah, and it makes it's another way too of, obviously there are the mundane things that we can do to help any situation, which, magic is never a band-aid. It's part of the process in order to help as an aid, right? It's a tool. So you can do all of the physical things, but sometimes you just feel like there isn't anything else you can do. You exhausted everything else. And so connecting with that sigil, and especially knowing that other people are connecting to it, it's like a march. The protest marches are great, but not everybody has the ability or can get the time off to be in a giant group of people and feel that. But you can still do that from your home and feel the power of connecting with all these people all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful point. So, Laura, I'm curious, you've been involved in the collective magic around some of the most painful and challenging social problems of our time in your work. When you bring it home to you personally, how do you cope with grief and rage when you look at the state of the world?
This might be a bit of a Sicilian Italian upbringing, but I feel like the first thing I try to do is physically affect my environment, which means I clean. I try to put things in order. I clean.
Clean your house? Mm-hmm.
I clean the house, which is also a cleansing process. Mm-hmm. But it can be going out into the yard if I can, if the weather's good, to dig into the earth and making sure I'm providing a habitat for the bees and the other animals and taking care of the plants that are in my domain. But just even within the house, there's a sense of if you put your house in order, your desk in order, then suddenly you feel like, all right, I have control over this. And then your sense of control and understanding expands from there. Mm-hmm. If it gets really, really stressful to the point where like, okay, I've cleaned, I've done all this, then I whip out the big tools, which is, okay, now some things are going to get set on fire. I might do, it might get to the point of doing some ecstatic dance or calling some folks together to elevate that. But I find that usually just the cleaning,
mm-hmm.
Helps get you in the state of mind and helps alleviate that versus going in step one, set things on fire.
Instead of skipping right to the arson. Yeah, no, I get it. Let's just start by cleaning the bathroom. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. And I actually really appreciate that because I do that too. I start left to right in a room and I just start putting things in order. And it does have a very settling effect on the nervous system. But I also, I can see how sigil craft is much like that. It's like I want to put my thoughts in order and I want sort of the gestalt of how I feel. I want a synthesis and a distillation. And so I want to thank you for making Sigil Witchery so accessible to those of us who maybe feel like it's the domain of only the artists and the inspired folk.
I feel it's important that everybody be able to tap into their power, especially these are the times that we live in.
You've really done a service for a lot of us with your book. Thank you so much for sharing the additional insights today. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Well, I hope Laura inspired you to pick up a pen and play around with turning your intentions into portals of magical power. Maybe you'll create your own sigil, and if you do give it a try, post it on Instagram and tag us. Thanks so much to Laura for being on the show, and thanks also to our episode sponsor, Therese Couture, and her program, Embodied Manifestation. For links to each of their work, visit the show notes on my website, carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. And listener shout out to all the folks joining us from Salem, Massachusetts, sending lots of love to the witches listening and working their healing magic in that land. And thank you, my friend, for listening. It does mean a lot to me that you choose to spend your time here with me. When you step into this field with me, it feels like you're blessing my life. So I really do appreciate that. And until next time, take care.